Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tanoa Talk. As always, I am the Kava. So pull up a chair, get out your shell, and let's talk Kava. So I know it's been a long time since I did one of these podcasts. I've been very busy with Kava. I've been focusing 100% on Kava as the executive director of the Kava Coalition. But I did want to come back and do an episode or two here and there, informally as the Kava. I don't really venture much into the Kava review space anymore because I work across the industry now. I try to maintain good relationships with all the vendors, all of the Kava bars, all of the different Kava companies and stakeholders. So it would be inappropriate for me to drink Kava on videos and talk about which ones I preferred and which ones I didn't prefer. So instead, I'm just going to zoom out with these podcasts and talk more generally about Kava itself, the Kava space, the Kava production situation in the South Pacific, the regulatory and policy environment for Kava in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. Use this podcast to really cover more topical stuff. And also, bring back some of the excitement, some of the humor, some of the fun that came along with the Kava videos. I have a lot of people come up to me in my current role and, ask me about my videos and why I don't do my videos anymore. And they miss, this is their words, not mine. They miss watching the videos and they miss seeing my reaction when I throw back 3 or 4 shells of Kava and then give my thoughts on its effects. And rest easy, rest assured, the Kava abides. I am still imbibing in my Kava on almost a daily basis. Recently, I've been drinking a lot of single cultivars from Knock 'em All at Home, Paula Rasul to be exact, and some Celesi, some other ones. So I wanted to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the cool stuff I've done since I became the executive director of Kava Coalition. And I think first and foremost, I wanted to talk about my recent visit to the South Pacific. In October and November of 2025, I visited Fiji twice, Vanuatu once, and the Solomon Islands once, respectively. And I wanted to break those experiences into 3 different episodes because they're all 3 very different, equally enriching, equally amazing experiences, totally different contexts, totally different countries, and really taught me a lot about the people, the culture, the history, and the variations in Kava that you find in the Pacific. Something that I understood, tangentially before the trip and now understand on a very personal, deep, lived experience kind of level. Of course, I do want to start with Vanuatu because most Kava drinkers dream of going to Vanuatu. We have these beautiful visions of crystal clear waters and coral reefs with rainbow-colored fish swimming around, like this giant aquarium with rainforests and Kava kind of in the middle of it. And honestly, that's all true. So make no mistake, if you go to Vanuatu and you're looking for the most beautiful environment, the most pristine coral reefs, you are going to find all that stuff. But the Kava situation there is what really puts Kava on the map for most of us who are in this Kava community. So I flew to Vanuatu from Fiji. I had about a week in Fiji doing some really cool work for Kava Coalition. But I flew into Vanuatu having consumed a lot of Fijian Kava over the previous week or so. And I was picked up at the airport by Michael Luze, who's a legendary agronomist and Kava industry person who's been working with Kava for decades and buying and exporting Kava for a long time. And Also doing some really cool work studying the history of kava products on the market. He has all these really cool collections, including postcards from different Pacific Island countries that have kava depicted in them, going back hundreds of years. He showed me some postcards from like the World War I, World War II era, with people drinking kava on them. They were sent to Europe. He also has a lot of these cool different tinctures and pharmaceuticals that were sold in the United States and Europe in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Kava was mostly used back then as a antifungal, antibiotic for STDs, for urinary tract infections, and for other ailments, as well as kidney disease. So he has a lot of these cool products. Michael could really start a museum if he chose to do so. Most interestingly for me, getting a history of kava use in the West is really important because in the United States, in our country, if you're listening to this in the United States, kava has been facing a lot of challenges recently, and it would be beneficial and fortuitous for us to create a record of kava's presence in the United States, the different products that have been sold, especially kava as a food. We know that Hawaii became part of the U.S. in the late 1800s. American Samoa became part of the U.S. in 1900, around the year 1900 on the dot. And we know that people were drinking kava traditionally in Hawaii and American Samoa at that time. But there's also a really rich history of kava being exported from Hawaii, from the South Pacific, from Fiji, into California, where there are a lot of Pacific Island diaspora populations, including in the mid-1900s and early 1900s, as well as I think in the late 1800s. And we've seen records of kava being imported to the U.S. For South Pacific communities in the Bay Area of San Francisco. There were a lot of people working in industry, in infrastructure, building railroads, building bridges, building roads, all that kind of stuff, who were from the South Pacific, and they consumed a steady amount of kava. And so there are newspaper accounts of what was offloaded at the docks in the port of San Francisco and other places, and we see kava coming off of those boats, and it's all recorded in the newspapers as early as the 1890s. And this is important because the FDA and the U.S. government have contended that kava is not consumed as a food, that it's consumed as a medicine. But we have records of kava being consumed as a food, being imported as a food, sold as a food, consumed as a food. And that would mean that it should be regulated as a food. And that's really what we're trying to push for. I've been working a lot with policymakers in all 50 states to try to send that message home so that our deer root can be protected and served in kava bars as a single ingredient food with water. All right, so going back to Vanuatu, that was a little bit of a tangent. I wanted to talk, and I think this is what everybody wants to hear about. I wanted to talk about my kava experience. So I had read a lot of accounts and heard a lot of accounts of people drinking kava in the South Pacific over the past 20 years, 2 decades of my life. And I always was a little bit, how do I say it? Suspicious, maybe is too strong of a word. Cynical, skeptical. Skeptical is the word I'm looking for. I was always a little bit skeptical of the accounts of people drinking kava in books like Getting Stoned with Savages by Jean-Martin Troost, by Paul Theroux and his Paddling the Pacific, by other writers, bloggers, people giving accounts of their kava experiences in Vanuatu and other places. The one differentiator between how we drink kava in the United States and how people drink kava in Vanuatu is, of course, the freshness of the kava. Not only is the kava pulled out of the ground and masticated and processed freshly in Vanuatu, but it's also, never frozen, never packaged, never shipped. never removed from its original form. So you get the kava straight out of the ground. It's ground up in a machine, usually like a grinder, kind of looks like a big sausage grinder, and then it's squeezed in fresh water into big buckets that are sold in nakamals for like 200 Vanuatu or 300 Vanuatu per shell. And this kava is extremely fresh, the freshest it can be. Well, actually, I'll get back to that. It's not the freshest it can be. It's like the second freshest it can be. And yes, all of those stories have a kernel of truth, at least a kernel of truth to them. It is fundamentally a different experience. So I got off the plane in Port Vila. I got down, went through immigration. It was like 92 degrees Fahrenheit, very humid. I met Michael Luce at the airport, got into his Land Cruiser, and we kind of chugged out of the airport parking lot. And our first stop was at Pandanas, which is a kava bar, a nakamal, right near the airport. And this was a bit early in the day, so it wasn't that busy. I want to say it was like 3 p.m., 4 p.m. That's usually when people just get started drinking kava, if they are going to drink kava that day. So we get to this kava bar, and it looks like the closest thing I could compare it to is like a park mixed with a farmer's market with like stalls. You have in the back corner a little shop that sells water, soda, candies, chips, stuff like that, crisps, you can call them. And then in the middle of the place, you have like all these windows. It's like a large cement structure, rectangular in shape. And you have these windows with iron gates that open and close. And there's a little sign in front of the window, a chalkboard, I guess you could call it. And on that chalkboard, they write the island that the kava is coming from. So Santo, Pentecost, Tana, Malakula, Ifate, whichever island that kava comes from. And then the price of the kava, again, it's like 200 Vanuatu per shell. So I get there and I'm talking with Michael. I meet the owner of Pandanas. And then we go and we have our first shell. And Michael and I, Michael explained to me that, when you drink a shell of kava in Vanuatu, what you typically do is kind of stand over this trough kind of looking thing, and you spit, then you drink the kava all in one go, and then you spit it out, but in like kind of a cloud, like a burst, not like a spitting like a loogie, but like spraying like a spray spit. And then you swing the shell around until it's drained of kava, and then you give it back to the person who sold you the shell. So Michael and I bought our shells. We went to this trough, and you don't really like say cheers. You certainly don't say bula because that's not a Vanuatu word. You just kind of like do it yourself. You stare off into the distance, which is accurate to what most of the accounts say if you read the books like Getting Stoned with Savages. And then you throw back the shell, and the kava itself is like almost like something you would get like at a juice bar in the U.S., like a wheatgrass type texture, very thick, green to gray, greenish gray color. And when you throw it back, like the first sensations you're going to get on your mouth are of like chlorophyll. I'd say chlorophyll is a word that you're going to probably hear me say a lot when I talk about drinking fresh kava. It's not like drinking fresh kava in the U.S. So if you buy fresh kava here from like Root of Happiness, which is really delicious, you're going to get this like cucumber water type texture. And yes, you're going to want to throw that in a blender, blend it up, warm water, get that kava lactone froth on the surface. But you're going to get this like result that's more of like a cucumber water. Honestly, more delicious. I would say the fresh frozen kava you get in the U.S. kind of tastes better than what you would get in Vanuatu. But this stuff in Vanuatu has this really pungent, grassy, aromatic, chlorophyll textured palate that really can only be described as like grass cuttings blended with black peppercorn and like thickened with something. Which, it sounds kind of disgusting, especially if you don't drink kava. But to me, it was like mind-blowing because I had never tasted kava that had come right out of the ground. I mean, this is probably 4 or 5 days removed from being harvested, ground through a machine and then squeezed in water. And the numbing effect of fresh kava comes on so strong. It really it's like being hit by a train. I remember when I first started drinking kava 20 years ago or so, I got the numbing effect a lot when I would drink kava. My lips, my tongue, the back of my throat, everything would be numb when I would drink a shell of kava. That kind of went away over time. Drinking kava every day, I feel like I lost that numbness that I used to get. And I didn't really miss it. I just kind of forgot about it. But this numbs you in a way that you're not going to forget about it. It's like right on the surface. You could probably have a tooth pulled and you wouldn't feel it for like a couple minutes. Exaggeration, of course. But yeah, so I got that numbing effect, and then they have these little areas. They're kind of like cabanas almost. Weird comparison, probably the first time it's ever been made, but little like areas that are covered from the sun, and they're metal or wooden benches that you can sit on. So Michael and I sat down and we talked. I talked about Fiji and my experience in Fiji. We talked generally about kava. About 8 or 9 minutes into that conversation, I felt like my brain was expanding and kind of floating a little bit. Felt really good. I went back and had another shell of kava. I think Michael wisely said that one was enough for that time of the day. And I had another shell and immediately, went back, sat down, talked a little bit more. And I want to say it was like around 4:30 or 5 at this point. And I was starting to feel tired. My eyelids felt very heavy. But not like I wanted to fall right asleep, just kind of like dragging, heavy, wanting to be out of the heat, that kind of feeling. And I had just gotten off the airplane. I had just, traveled from Suva, so it was a long flight. Hot day. So I wanted to go to the hotel and, get my bag to the hotel, maybe rinse off, turn on the air conditioner, lay down for a few minutes, which is exactly what I did. So Michael graciously dropped me off at the Melanesian where I was staying. I got like a huge bag or packet of cold water to drink and keep me hydrated. And I went back and laid down and probably slept for like an hour and a half. And I told myself, I was like, when I wake up, I am going to go get more kava because I'm in Vanuatu for the first time and I want to drink more kava. But when I woke up, I want to say it was like 7 p.m., something like that. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to skip kava for tonight and I'm going to go and get some food and maybe have a beer and get some solid sleep, which is exactly what I did. So, we stayed in Port Vila for a few days, doing meetings for work, which I won't go into detail on. And then we flew from Port Vila to Luganville on Espiritu Santo, which is an island in the northwest of Vanuatu, one of the bigger islands and the biggest kava producing island in the country. So I'm going to fast forward a bit because I don't want to talk about the meetings that I was in. That's not really stuff that it's appropriate for me to share here. But I'll fast forward to this trip that I made, and there's going to be a video. Actually, no, the video is online already. There's a village that I went to in the rainforest in the agricultural part of the island where I met with a kava farmer. And I want to go into some detail about this experience because this was probably like the best experience of the whole South Pacific trip. Certainly in the top 3. In terms of kava, the number 1 in my life. Just to put it very frankly, I've been to 63 countries. I've had a lot of experiences. Of all the kava experiences, including drinking kava in like South Sudan and Ethiopia and the most kind of rural parts of Africa. This was the most amazing because it's being at the core drinking fresh kava. Anyway, I went to a very rural farm outside of Luganville, and we went to meet with the people we were going with to load up the Land Cruiser, and I jumped into the back. It was a flatbed truck, and I was in the back of this truck with 3 or 4 other Ni Vanuatu gentlemen farmers, and we drove for about 40 minutes into the rainforest on a very rough road. You know, I had branches and bugs and everything flying my direction. I stood up to try to get a good view, but I was getting hit by branches left and right. So I eventually just kind of tucked in behind the glass of the car, the truck, and we finally get there. And I just look around. I can't even see a path. It just feels like the truck fell out of the sky into the middle of the rainforest. But I get out of the truck, and then we follow this farmer he has a baseball cap on and like a loincloth, and that's it. It's kind of a traditional Ni Vanuatu farmer, big gray beard. You'll see him in the video if you look it up on YouTube. It's under Kava Coalition. But he takes me to his farm, and his farm is this beautiful agroforestry plot with 5 or 6 varieties of kava. You have Pala Rasul, Melo Melo, Kalai, different varieties of kava. And then you have hardwood trees, papayas, cassava, taro, some legumes like beans or groundnuts or some kind of ground cover leguminous crop. And he asked me, what kind of kava I wanted to drink. And he also showed me around his farm and showed me the different plants he was growing. And I said, I said that I would like to drink whatever kava he thought was appropriate to harvest at that time. Something that's 3 years old, 3 to 4 years old. So we kind of bushwhacked around a little bit, looking at different plants, and then finally he said, this Pala Rasul right here will be a good one. So he used a digging stick, which is like you just take a stick off the ground that's of the right length, like maybe 4 feet long, and use a machete to sharpen one end of it. And then he used that stick to dig around the base of this Pala Rasul plant to loosen up the soil and loosen up the roots. And then he had me pull the plant out of the ground all in one go. So I just pulled it up really quickly. And then he cut the branches off, which are used for cuttings, for multiplying the cuttings. And then I carried the Lawena stalk, the main corm of the plant with all the waka roots radiating out. I carried that to the area where we were going to prepare the kava. So Andy, who is the gentleman I was with, he walked with me to the area where we were going to squeeze the kava. And then when we got there, there were some people who had put together all the different items that were needed for this process, like a metal bowl, a mortar and pestle, which with like a big plastic tube around it, so that they could pound the kava. So basically, what they do is they wash the kava and then they peel the roots. So they use a knife to just peel the outer parts of the roots until you have just the yellow flesh or the white flesh of the plant. You then take those chunks of Lawena and you put the waka aside. I'll get back to this. I'm not sure if it's going to be on this episode or a future one. But in Vanuatu, the waka is what's usually used for drying and making kava powder for export, because you don't drink waka fresh. It's too strong. It's too peppery. So most of the kava drinkers in Vanuatu just want to drink Lawena. And it totally makes sense, because the Lawena is plenty strong, as you'll hear very shortly. So they peeled the roots and then they put them into this mortar and they pounded them with a pestle, which actually in the video you'll see me using it inside of this long white tube. That's just basically so that we didn't lose any of the kava. So you pound the kava, and then you take the pulp which looks like what you get when you buy frozen kava. It's just like shredded up, ground up kava root. And you throw all that kava into a metal bowl and squeeze it in the water. So you're going to want to squeeze the kava with your bare hands in this big metal bowl with fresh water in it until it's like foaming with bubbles. And the Ni Vanuatu call this bubble trouble. And bubble trouble is a good thing. Bubble trouble is basically a sign that like this is going to be some kick-ass strong kava. So we saw the bubbles, and we knew that the kava had been kneaded enough, and this took like a good amount of time, like 30 to 40 minutes. So if you're making your kava in your kitchen here in the United States, you're not taking 30 to 40 minutes to squeeze it, nor should you. There's no reason to go that far with dried kava prepared in the kitchen. You're just basically squeezing it into a water extract until you've gotten all of the kava lactones out, and you just have these fully extracted fibrous kava roots. So then you pour it through a sieve, like kind of similar to what we use to squeeze kava here, and then you pour it through that, and then you continue to squeeze it until you have no more water in the bag, and you just have these dried, desiccated macas roots that can be discarded. And what you have is a bowl, and this is probably 20 pounds of kava out of the ground that we harvested, and you have all that kava roots, and then you have a big bowl of fresh kava. And one thing I learned while doing this is they started off with a certain amount of water, and they ended with that same amount of liquid. So there was at no point was there water added. We kind of settled on a certain amount of water. Again, I can't remember how much it was, but that's how much we ended up with. So there was no way to dilute it or kind of change the thickness of the kava. So we have the kava in bowls, and then there's like papaya, bananas, ground nuts. There's a spread of goods for us to eat. And we had like 5 or 6 people there. Michael Luze was there. Pierre Lecouve from Pacific Kava, his wife, some friends, some other farmers that came along with us. They were all there. We were just having like a kava session. It's kind of like a welcome to Vanuatu, first kava experience for me. Very well put together, hospitable greeting. One of the most amazing things that's ever happened in my life. And on that note, all of these people are just unbelievable, great people, just the kindest people I've ever met in my life. So genuine, so curious, so happy to share their experience and their life and their joy and their kind of family-like attitude with you, to share their culture. It's something they're very proud of. And they all really want the world to know what kava is like in Vanuatu, and they all really want the world to benefit from this plant. And I feel like every time they share these kinds of experiences, they're being diplomats for kava. And if there was a way that they could do it for everyone, they would. From that perspective, I'm so privileged to have had this experience. But anyway, I just thought I'd put that in there because a lot of people took time out of their lives to share this experience with me and to give me this experience. So we drank the kava together after this, and this started by Andy, who was the farmer that I was with, and then one of the other members of his group, like some kind of village elder, a very well-respected Ni Vanuatu man. The 3 of us prayed together, kind of an ancestral prayer. It was in a local language, and then you pour a little bit of the kava from the shell on the ground, and we drink. We took off our hats, or Andy took off his hat. I didn't take off my hat because I didn't get the social cue, but he took off his hat, and then we drank the kava And I just, after I drink that shell of Kava, and this is why I wanted to create a line between the Kava in Port Villa and this Kava, the taste of that Kava was so profound. It was so indescribable. It had all that chlorophyll. It had those peppery notes that I talked about before. But there was like some kind of X factor that I can't put my finger on for how this Kava tasted, that I think you really have to go to the farm. So not even just go to Vanuatu, but go all the way to one of these farms to taste that. And I tasted it the next day too, because we made more Kava. So it's really like that village level Kava, like Kava that's just been pulled out of the ground, just been pounded, just been squeezed that day. It has this certain flavor that's, again, like there's an X factor. I can't put my finger on it. And that is directly related to the effects. So when I drink that Kava, I kind of looked up at the sky, and it was a clear day at that point. Let me put the emphasis on at that point. And I looked up at this bright blue South Pacific sky, the same color as the water, that turquoise blue color, and these big hardwood tropical trees swaying above me. I just looked up and I saw all this foliage and this canopy, and it was like waving. I felt like I was in an aquarium of kelp, and I was looking up to the surface of the ocean. The Kava really, really hit me so quickly that even if you watch the video, you'll see me stand there and kind of look up at the sky. That moment felt like 10 minutes, but it was really only like 40 seconds. And my whole mouth was numb. I felt like I was floating, like I had this kind of bird-like feeling when the Kava hit my bloodstream. And then, kind of mellowed out, kind of went back to the normal flow of things, talking, sharing experiences, laughing. So that sociability kicked in really quickly. They wanted to know my backstory. They wanted to know my experience with Kava over my life. I talked a lot about Africa. I talked a lot about my kids. I just got into like really personal stuff, and so did they. It was this very sociable, recreational, beautiful social experience, this cultural interchange of ideas, emotions, feelings, vibrations, And that one shell, I want to say we waited like 45 minutes before we went for a second shell. And they laid out these banana leaves. They laid out these really big, beautiful banana leaves on the ground. And we had our second shell of Kava. And I was like, okay, this is going to be where the sociability probably drops off a little bit, hence the banana leaves. And I drank that second shell, and I laid down on this banana leaf, and I went back into that, like, looking up at the sky, tree stage of things. And that second shell of Kava, like, really firmly kicked my ass, really knocked my socks off. So I was, like, staring up at these trees, swaying. Every breath that I took, in, out, like the whole earth seemed to be breathing with me. The trees were kind of moving with my breath. I felt this connection to the people there, to the earth, that very rarely in my life have I felt. Deeply profound stuff. And then I went for a third shell, and I don't want to say that I regret having a third shell, but yeah, I kind of do. Because after that third shell, I mean, things got really wonky. Like, my eyes were kind of floating around in my skull. I had a hard time focusing on one thing. I would try to fix my gaze on like an object, or there was a cottage there. I tried to fix my gaze on the cottage, and it would kind of start to double up, and I was getting a little bit dizzy, just dizzy, not nauseous, but just dizzy with that part of it. And then the temperature suddenly shifted. There was this huge increase in air pressure, and then these clouds built up, and thunder was in the distance. And we had all this stuff splayed out on the ground, banana leaves. We had bowls. We had all the equipment that was used to make the kava. So we were like, oh, shoot. And we had a cameraman with us. So we were like, oh, shoot, we need to like get back to the car, which was, 20, 30 minutes away. And we packed up all this stuff, and these big droplets of rain started falling down. And, in the South Pacific, when you get a rainstorm, you don't get like little drops of rain. You get these kind of bullets of rain that come careening out of the sky at, God knows how many miles per hour, and they start hitting you, and it's like one droplet of rain will hit you on your head, and then one will hit your arm, and then all of a sudden it's like a bucket of water is falling on you. So we were all soaking wet. We get back to the car, and it was starting to get really dark. It was kind of getting late in the day, and Michael Luze was driving the car, and we were going back to Luganville to get something to eat. I think we got some pizza, and I was in the car in the passenger seat in the front, and I was just absolutely booled out of my mind. And I was looking down the road, and I was watching the windshield wipers and watching the water fly off, and just kind of talking with Michael and talking with Malcolm, who was the cameraman. Just kind of passing stories, just talking story. And I looked out on the road, and I saw, and I swear to God, this is what I saw: a person on the side of the road in the headlights of the car with a pink umbrella and with like a scarf. And I was looking, and I kind of narrowed my eyes, and I was like, why would there be somebody in the middle of the jungle on this road in this pouring rain wearing a scarf? And I stared forward, I stared at this person, and they turned into a dog, and they ran across the road. And for a full minute, I didn't say anything. And then I looked over, and I said, did you see that dog cross the road? And Michael was like, yes, there was a dog that crossed the road. And then I followed it up with, well, that was a person that turned into a dog. And then everybody in the car just kind of looked at me like, oh, this guy's really here in the Kava here. I've told that story dozens of times since then, and every time it's still, it's exactly how it went. I saw this clear as day person, pink umbrella, wearing a scarf, looking towards us, head cocked, holding their hand kind of at their neck level with the umbrella in their fist. And then they kind of melted into this dog-like being and scurried across the road. And I swear that's exactly what I saw. Anyways, so there was this like hallucinogenic period of the Kava. It kind of started with the breathing and the forest moving with my breath. And then it kind of ended there. I want to say right after that, I started to move more into like a relaxed, body numbing part of the Kava experience. So really, all of that is to say that this is the difference between drinking Kava, dried Kava in the United States. No matter how much you drink, this is the difference between drinking Kava here and drinking that fresh Kava. So I wanted to demystify, in a way, on this podcast, the difference between having Kava in the U.S. and having Kava in Vanuatu, and trying to de-exaggerate the stories that are in books and kind of try to capture it for what it is. If you've watched my videos, you've heard me describe Kava. You've heard me describe the effects of Kava. So you're familiar with how I experience it. And that was the difference. I would say like the quantity that it took me to get there, and then the experience itself. So I've drinking, plenty of Kava here in the U.S. in one sitting, probably 3 liters of fairly heavy, noble Waka, Vanuatu Kava, Fiji Kava, Solomon Islands Kava, PNG Kava, whatever it is, Hawaiian Kava, Samoan, Tongan. And I've gotten to a point where I had the eye thing, where my eyes were kind of unable to focus. But I've certainly never drank kava that was so potent and so fresh that, after 2 shells, I was able to kind of move with the earth and feel like completely in tuned with all the trees and the earth and everything around me. I have never gotten to that point here in the U.S. And that's only with 2 shells of this stuff. So like, I don't know, maximum like 20 ounces. When I talked to the folks there about the milligrams of kava lactones, they were saying that each one of those shells probably has like 1.5 to 2 grams of kava lactones, which is insane. Because if you go into a kava bar in the U.S., you're getting, at best, 250 milligrams per shell of kava. So the other thing I wanted to say is the next day when we got together for this like little party, it was like somebody's birthday. Happy birthday to whoever that was. I can't remember. But there was more people, and we had village elders, community leaders, all these kind of big names from the local area come together, talk about the history of the area, talk about the land tenure issues, things like that. But the other major difference was that day I only drank 1 shell, maybe 2 shells, or maybe 1.5 shells of kava. But it like did something to me that I've never experienced before, which is it wasn't like starting new. The kava that I had the day before, which is the one I just described, it was all still in my bloodstream. And when I drank that first shell of kava at this party, it like took me right back to that 3rd shell from the previous day. Only this time, like it just completely locked me up. I could not talk. I felt very introspective. It was kind of in my head. I was relaxed. I wasn't anxious, but I just could not talk. I was just kind of disinterested in conversation. And this is a very common thing in Vanuatu. When you go into kava bars or nakamals, people are pretty quiet and often sitting by themselves. And it was good for me to experience this because it didn't happen again after that. But I'm glad I had that one experience where I got to that place where I just wanted quiet. I didn't want music. I didn't want bright lights. I just kind of wanted to be alone, sitting, staring, relaxing. And haven't had that experience anywhere else except for in Vanuatu. Well, I think that does it for this episode. I really just wanted to describe the Vanuatu experience, that particular day in detail, most importantly. And I wanted to convey that to listeners, to people who've been watching my videos for a long time, just to give you a taste of what you could find if you happen to get on a plane in one place and get off a plane and be in Port Vila, which is very, very far away for most of us, including myself. But I think this is probably one of the most important narrations I've ever given on Kava and Kava experiences. And God knows I've done hundreds of videos, dozens of podcasts, and then I've talked with people for probably 10,000 hours over the past 20 years about Kava. But I wanted to tell this story without notes, without a script, just off the top of my head, to narrate it to you and to give it to you as a Christmas gift here in 2025 before the year ends. So, Vinaka, thank you. Merci beaucoup for all your attention and for your continued engagement with Kava and the Kava community. And please, please, please join the Kava Lounge on Facebook, participate in the Kava Lounge on Facebook, and please try to support the efforts of the Kava Coalition. It's really the honor of a lifetime to be the executive director of this organization, and we are facing a lot of challenges in the Kava industry, and the best way to overcome these challenges is to come together, to work together, to cooperate, even if it doesn't feel like it's working or if it feels like it doesn't make sense. Let's give it a shot because we have everything to lose and nothing to gain if we don't. So, Vinaka, and I will come back to you with some stories about the Solomon Islands and Fiji very soon. Thank you so much.